Larissa Cox. I'm from Vancouver, currently living in Kelowna. Um, I have a background in B2B SaaS, been doing that for about 15 years. I started off with a master's of science in more animal science, and then I got a job in marketing and then in B2B SaaS, and it grew from there. And then a couple of years ago, I completed my executive MBA from Royal Roads University.
And what's so interesting is obviously B2B SaaS sales marketing has changed so much over the past year, past 3 years, past 5 years. What would you say when you kind of looking back on your career? And it's always funny to say that because I'm like 10 years ago, I'm like, oh crap, I was working 10 years ago. That's not like a dramatic thing anymore. But what do you think if someone, jumping into the industry, what's probably the biggest thing you did at the beginning of your career? Well, now is either a skill that isn't required as much, or if it feel a skill that's underdeveloped when come with these new entrants into the market.
That's a really good question. I don't know if I have an answer, but I can tell you about the development of my career. I started out with social media, and I was in academics for a long time, and I was doing a lot. I had a blog, and I had a Twitter presence, and I had a Facebook presence, and I was like a really kind of like early influencer. And so when I got a job, I ended up not leaning on my science. I ended up
Mhm,
leaning on my blogging for a job.
mhm,
And
mhm,
actually, I wanted to go into sales. And a friend of mine from science, she got a job in sales in pharmaceuticals.
mhm.
And I was like, well, what do I have to do to get a job? And she was like, get experience in that whole catch 22, right?
Yep.
And so I was like, I guess I'm going to get experience somehow. And so I applied for a sales and marketing
Mhm,
internship. And I thought that I was going to learn sales to go into pharmaceutical
mhm,
sales. And because I had a blog, they uh, decided to put me more into the marketing side of things and to do
mhm,
their blog and their content and their social. And at the time, I was just really surprised that people even wanted me to do social media for companies because I thought that it was more of like a peer to peer thing and companies
mhm,
didn't care about it. So I think when I entered into the market, that was like the dawn of social media. And at the time, I was
mhm,
just dumbfounded that companies even cared about social media. And I guess now, on that sense, it's sort of like social media, I don't think has the same clout anymore to reach an audience. And
mhm,
I don't think a lot of people are using the platforms like they were doing back in the
mhm,
early days. I don't think people have trust in the platforms. I think there's an erosion of sort of that institutional
mhm,
trust, in technology, and social. And so, in terms of marketing, it's not necessarily as clear cut because
mhm,
the consumers that you're trying to reach are getting so much more wise to the ways of marketers, and they aren't trusting. We're living in, that post truth
mhm,
world, and in a large way, I think that was caused by marketers
mhm,
and what they're talking about. And so I think social media, email marketing, and like how, like the mechanisms of how you're reaching your
mhm,
audience massively changed over the course of my career. Where when I was entering, it was yeah, just that dawn of social media, that people were very open to sharing. They were open to brands. They were open to products
mhm,
online. They were very enthusiastic about companies starting on Facebook and having a social media presence. And I think now it's the antithesis of that, where people like just vehemently distrust the presence of brands. And even on LinkedIn, it's like people would want to hear from people rather than brands. And so I think that's the huge seismic shift, even beyond AI and technology. It's
mhm.
just like the market dynamics and the market shift of who they trust and where they get their information from and how you have to go to market to reach them.
That's it's so funny because I remember first few roles out of school, like social media was that thing where like, oh my goodness, how do I manage my social media? That was like a big role, not in pay typically back in the day, but a big role in the sense of like team was like, I don't know how to do this. We're gonna hire an intern to do our Facebook and our Instagram marketing, or not even marketing, just posting. They're like, oh, we need to be on here.
Yeah.
And now it's so interesting. Like when I have people applying to roles, it's like if the company doesn't have a LinkedIn, an Instagram, I've heard of people applying to roles being like, oh, they don't have enough followers. Like it's almost like a need to have, like back in the day when a website was like, oh, you have a website, like that's not
Hmm.
cool, but like, oh, but now if you don't have a website, I don't think you're a real business. Same with
Yeah.
social media. If you have a social media presence, you're like, oh, is this a scam? So it's
Yeah.
that kind of interesting shift. But what's also really interesting is that, like as you touched on, and I've been seeing this firsthand, is now founders hiring people for their own personal like PR and brands to say like, I need someone who posts not as the company but as me as the founder.
Mhm.
And obvious like, and even throughout my career and through my own personal life, I've been seeing a lot of very successful people realize this now, paying for content teams just for themselves,
Mhm.
because even though it is very polished, very polished personal brand, at least it's a human talking to you. And that I think is going to be, that's like the big shift of how do you commercialize. The CEO of a company becomes just as important as the brand of the company, which 20 years ago, no one really cared. No one knew who the CEO was. And now it's such a big driver of success.
I remember even talking to a general manager. It was I was working in a big S&P 500, and the GM of my division was trying to convince him to have a more brand presence. And at the time, it wasn't because I wanted him to do influencer marketing. It was because I was locked in. The company that I was working at had a very strict social media policy, and they had a social media manager, and that was running social media for this entire multi billion dollar company, and it all came down to this one man, and we only had one LinkedIn presence, one Facebook presence, one Twitter presence, um, for the entire multi billion dollar company. And they did that for strategy. And even on LinkedIn, they were refusing to spin up other pages because they said that that was confusing and they were really narrowing down. So if you wanted to post anything for your section of the business, it would go into a queue, and you maybe might be posting about your, I don't know, $100 million business inside this multi billion dollar business once a month. And yeah, so it amounted to no social presence. And so like you were saying, like if a company doesn't have a social media presence, do they even exist? And so this was years ago, and I was like, well, I'm heading up the marketing for the $30 million size of the business, and I'm assisting a 100 million, and that's encapsulated in this, like it was like 10 billion. I think it's 25 billion now. And I was like, but the 30 million business and this 100 million business basically are ghosts. Nobody knows about them. And so I was saying to the GM, I need to take over your Twitter. I need to take over your social media so that I can like fucking advertise our product line, because you're the only entry point. You're the GM. People will trust you. You can talk about the product. Help me help you sell this product online, because right now I'm so capped. I can't even do this. And so I was begging him, and he was kind of a little bit resistant. But I think that a lot of this influencer marketing started because of that initial need, where they didn't do it because they wanted to rep a company, because they wanted to be an influencer, but because there was some sort of bottleneck in social media brand presence, which they had to take on that role. That being said, I think back to my point about the distrust of brands and people trusting humans, and it all comes down to authenticity. And if people catch on to the fact that these founder voices are just substitutes for the corporate brand speak, and that person actually isn't authentic, and they've hired a marketing team, and that it's just their picture and their face, but they're just parroting, or there's an AI video of them, something, people are going to cotton on to that as well, and they're not going to trust the founders either. So it becomes this vicious circle of distrust and people trying to hack the system, when really it all comes down to authenticity. And if people would just show up with their authentic selves, and if even the brand were to be more authentically themselves, I feel like people would trust more. And a good company who has been the master of that is Apple. They have never really lost brand trust. And I think that that's because even though they're one of the biggest companies in the world, um, the foundations of Steve Jobs and now Tim Cook, maybe to a lesser degree, but overall, I think that they haven't really eroded consumer trust because they have been generally um, doing safe choices. They've been relatively transparent, and they've been generally relatively authentic. And I think that goes with trust and this whole thing of social media and connecting with people. Yeah. That's really right. That's I think you hit on a really good point when you said um, everything is sales. And the thing is that I don't think that you necessarily need to be, if you, in any position that you're in, you don't necessarily need to take that literally, that you need to be selling a product and hucking a product. I think the mindset, though, needs to be there, in that even if you're a developer, you need to be developing for the end customer. And one of the things that has been a real sticking point for me, like a real bee in my bonnet, is the lack of cross departmental communication across the board. We're talking, you can zoom out, and we're talking industries aren't talking to industries. We're talking science and technology advancement isn't talking to other types of advancement in, let's say, financial, in healthcare. Founders aren't talking to other founders, and this goes down into the microcosm of the company. Sales isn't talking to development, which isn't talking to HR, which isn't talking to anyone else. And it all kind of goes up to this murky leadership group who doesn't talk to their team, even. And it's all kind of caught into this bureaucracy where nobody is paying attention to anything except their weird little pigeonholed job, and they lose track of what really matters, which are the customers, and which the lifeblood of the company is your money, is your revenue. And if you lose your customers, you lose your revenue and your company goes bankrupt and you all don't have any jobs anyway. So if any one of you take your eye off the ball, which is sales ultimately, because like I said, that's like the beating heart of your entire company. You need money to survive. You need your customers to be paying you. You need customers to even be there. And so if you're a developer, or even I see this in marketing, like you're getting down the rabbit hole of AI and doing all of these automations and go to market engineering, and it's so cool. And I talk to some people and it's like, okay, well, that's really cool and awesome, but how much money are you making? And it's like, well, nothing. I'm not making anything. And it's like, well, that's kind of not, seeing the forest for the trees. And I just feel like everyone needs a reality check that it is all sales.
Mhm.
You gotta all be aligned on that.
Yeah. And
Gotta.
and I think like the thing with, and I think sometimes when you say like everything is sales, not literally, but your role should be bringing value. If you're not bringing value, what are you doing? And I think the dream, like everything else, once you go into the workflow automation rabbit hole, the dream I had as an operator was, can I connect every dollar to like an update? Like it, perfect data attribution, that's in the perfect world where data is clean and everything works. It's like, hey, by doing this update, every employee, you can see how much revenue they're generating by what the work they're doing. Impossible, but in my head, or on doing the MBA on the whiteboard, I'm like, it is possible to say, do a 2 by 2 value versus compensation, and who's the superstar A players. But I think that I've had people say that is like, you have to kind of connect it back. And I think when you say you have to sell stuff, it's just, what value are you bringing? And also, are you communicating what the work you're doing? Like as an engineer, being able to sell why the development roadmap you're working on is important, why you should be using Angular instead of React, like all these technical things you have to. And then for many, it's more difficult, but that's like anything in life. There are some parts where if you're not good at it, you have to figure out ways of compensating and trying to do that. And one thing you touched on, it's, I mean, when we were talking before, firstly, AI and go to market automation. I've so many times I've talked to founders and other team members, and they're like, I've automated our workflow. And I'm like, cool. Does the workflow work? And they're like, no idea. No idea if it works or not, but it's all automated. And I'm like,
Well,
that's
yeah,
just making you run faster into a wall. But it's like, but
is
it's automated. And I'm like, also, it's not free. I think people forget that like automation and AI and credits still
oh,
cost something. It's not as cheap as you think when you start running everything
what did
with
you
that, but
say?
it's so funny.
Driving faster into a wall?
Yeah.
That's
It,
exactly right.
it,
What the hell? It's so true.
and it's just the idea that I think it's, as you said, especially when you get very myopic, and I mean, like with an MBA is the same thing. Like you love operations, you love process, but it's rare the times you really ask, like, does this really matter? Because it's manual processes aren't scalable, but you only want to scale things that are, you only want to make scalable things of things that are repeatable and bring value. And I think that's the hard thing we're seeing with a lot of AI automation is automation for the sake of automation because it looks good to your manager or your boss, but
Yeah.
very few times they're taking a step back and saying,
Does it work?
does it really work?
Oh,
Um, and that's
exact
always challenging.
I had that exact conversation yesterday with someone who is working on go to market
Mhm.
engineering, and I've been mentoring him for over a month now,
Mhm.
and not once have we touched clay at all.
Mhm.
And or at least in our meetings. And he was talking to me yesterday about the fact that go to market engineering really is about a mindset
Mhm.
shift, not about automation.
Tools. Mhm.
And that he is feeling like all of this stuff seems to be impossible, like sending 7,000 emails out a day. It seems impossible. It seems stupid. And it seems like a good way for him to work himself out of a job.
Hmm.
And then, so we were talking about our approach, and it really is about manual processes first and foremost, making sure you know who you're targeting, making sure that you know what your outreach is going to be, knowing
Hmm.
exactly what signals to track. And that was another thing um, I was in my conversation yesterday about signals.
Hmm.
It's like you don't know what the signals are, or even if you can retrieve them without doing a deep dive and like interviewing your
Hmm.
customers and finding out their buying process. And one of the things he found was um, if someone is looking to change their CRM, then they're
Hmm.
looking to change their other software too. And so he
Hmm.
can get in when people are looking to change their CRM, but he doesn't know if people are actively publishing that on LinkedIn, like, hey, everyone, actively changing my CRM,
Yeah.
you know? Like, and so he's like, I don't know how to do that. So I have to look for other things as well, other
Mhm.
ripple effect things. And that's the research that I'm doing today. And I was like, oh, I'm so happy to hear that you're doing research, that you're doing work, that you're talking to your customers, you're doing customer interviews,
Mhm.
you're looking at things before you're doing it. And he's like, oh, I've got pages of notes on these guys, and I know exactly what they're doing, and I know exactly their pain points. And now I want to make sure that I know how I'm writing that outreach to them,
Mhm.
because I got to get it right. That first impression means something. I got to get it right. And I was like, thank fuck. Like
Mhm.
you're spending weeks on something, but the yes, it's manual tedium now, but the payoff is that you're going to actually close deals. You're
Mhm.
going to actually have value. You're actually going to be really, really invaluable for for your company
Mhm.
now because of this. Whereas if you just spun out, a clay
Mhm.
automation where you were just going for like literally anyone who could possibly fit into your TAM, and then sending them an outreach email and like a whole sequence,
Mhm.
they're just going to block you. And even if they were a perfect customer that fit your ICP perfectly, you just alienated them now.
It's so funny managing sales reps. I always find it's always like a back and forth balance where initially it's like, hey, focus on closing deals, but that's like a few steps. Like, okay, first of all, you have to prospect, get the list, send the email. So focusing just on closing deals is a hard metric because there's so many variables. So then you move back to, okay, let's focus on number of like demos booked. But then demos booked can also be a hard metric since, okay, that's number of like activities. But I
Mm-hmm.
always find it's always a circle because then when you focus too much on activities, then you're like boosting those numbers. You're saying a lot of emails, doing a lot of calls, but your demos aren't being booked. So you're like, okay, now we have to focus on getting demos because we are doing a lot of work, but our messaging is incorrect. Then you focus on demos and you focus on demos and you're like, I'm getting a lot of demos, but we're maybe not doing the best job at qualifying the leads. We're pushing everyone to demo. So then you focus on sales, but then you're focusing so much on sales where now you're like so hyper focused on one segment where you're not really being. So it's just like it's like anything that it's cyclical. You always kind of have to move between that. You
Always,
really want a healthy funnel.
right? It's
Yeah, it's always a balance, and
always
it's
that.
it's so fun, and it's like I forget the saying. It's like anything you measure is no longer a good measurement. So when you're like compensating, except for I guess closing deals because that's a semi good metric until you have to also realize it's okay deals who've then with your NRR like who've maintained subscription, who've renewed, because that's also a useful metric because many sales reps, you get the deal signed and you're like, yeah, we can do classic sales line. That's actually on the roadmap. We're building that's the next sprint. Yeah, so don't worry. Sign now, and then by a month once it'll be around, and then they churn, and the sales rep gets their comp, but then the CS team and the account management team is pissed because they're like, "Well, you're messing up our metrics." It's always this cyclical balance, but I think that's also why it's important of always taking a step back and saying, "Are we getting the results? What metric are we going against, and how can we build that authentic self?" Because I've also had many successful products that never really had a sales team until they were at 100 I think 100 million ARR because it was either inbound referral because their product was so good. So
Mm-hmm.
then you start doing sales. So it's always this interesting balance.
Yeah.
One thing we were
I was just
touching. Mhm.
basically
Go ahead.
the product market
Mhm.
fit, like, that whole thing, like, I think it comes down to two things: product market fit and go to
Mhm.
market strategy. And like, if you over focus, and it back to balance, like
Mhm.
if you focus on go to market too much and not on your product market fit,
Product. Mhm.
you're spiraling. And if you focus too much on your product market fit, you're collapsing.
Mhm.
And so you really need to have that balance where you understand your market. The product kind of sells itself because it's so useful to people.
Mhm.
But even that can stall out, and even that can spiral you down into collapse because you're focusing too much on on the current
Mhm.
customers. The same as like the explore exploit
Yeah.
dichotomy, whereas the product market fit is you're exploring deeper and deeper, and exploit is your go to market where you're trying to go broad. And
Mhm.
if you don't balance explore exploit, or those two
Mhm.
things, the product market fit
Mhm.
and go to market, you're either going to spiral into chaos or you're going to collapse into just stagnation.
Mhm.
So you need to do both.
It like everything in life, it's a balance, and the problem in life is that's always the case. And I think one hard thing, especially scaling a business, is how much value you put in current customers' feedback. Because firstly, people are very bad at explaining, finding solutions to their own pain. It's you always have that's why you have to find the core problem based on the symptoms. Because if you often ask them like, what solution do you want, they have no damn idea either. So then it's a blind leading the blind. And it's the classic thing. I've worked in industries where you're talking for as a SaaS seller, and this is some I used to work in procurement. If I asked a procurement person, hey, what tech solution do you want? They have no idea. They're just going to make up something. So if we listen to that as a, hey, this is what solution we want, you build a product no one actually wants. So it's always, you have to like the classic, you have to like, what is the pain points? How are you solutioning? And then giving them the solution. The Henry Ford quote of, we ask people what they want a faster horse is very true. I mean, I think that quote is misunderstood oftentimes, but I think it's very true of like, well, they want speed, they want efficiency. What's the best way of getting there? I think that's always an interesting balance.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we touched on a bit as well, and this is something I think with AI and go to market engineering and this whole battle between sales and marketing.
Yes.
Sales complains to marketing, marketing complains about sales. I was more on the sales side, you were on the marketing side. Where do you think most teams get it wrong between sales and marketing? Is it on what they consider a sales qualified lead, or kind of where have you seen that pain point? I think is being exacerbated now with AI because we don't need sales team. We use AI SDRs or vice versa. We can just create millions of content posts. Kind of how are you seeing that battle go on, especially from the go to market side where that role is almost becoming like hybridized, where it's kind of all combining into one, whether it be RevOps, sales ops, or marketing ops, or go to market engineering.
And it's interesting. I have my theories on where go to market should be, which is
Mm-hmm.
shifting that bridge role. And my theory, kind of, and this could
Mm-hmm.
be a really hot take. I believe that GTME is actually sort of the natural evolution of the SDR, and I don't think that it's really coming from RevOps. I think,
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, the bridge role is the SDR, because they're the ones that get the initial inbound leads,
Mm-hmm.
like the sort of cold MQLs.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones that talk, they're the first contact usually for the customer, the first human contact. And they're also the ones that pass to the account executives. And so RevOps, while they might know like the CRM and data
Mm-hmm.
hygiene and stuff, I think that they're, as a role, a little bit too far away from the customer.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And that I think that in order to do good automation and to actually make a valuable impact, you need to understand the customer. You need to understand their pain points. You need to actually talk to them, and you need to know kind of what that balance, that bridge is from content and someone reading that to actually booking a demo. And the only person in kind of modern corporate that knows even at all how that works is, hilariously enough, the most junior person in the company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. It I guess it goes back to what are you automating and why does it matter? The person has to understand the customer's pain points to know how that process works. And so that's an interesting perspective because I mean, this is like similar. I say go to market engineering is like product. No one knows what the heck they do. And at every company, it's so different. So the job descriptions are half the time useless because they're all the same job description with dramatically different roles. Um, it was interesting because I remember, I think last year, RevOps was like the fastest growing title. I was in RevOps. Like everyone else in RevOps, I ended up in RevOps without knowing what it was. You kind of just fall into it and that becomes your title. Talk to like three other people. That's the same thing. They were reps who like data and you kind of move this way. And I think go to market engineering initially was very much the same. It's okay. We have someone who's a little more technical. Maybe they're a product person moving into sales. Hey, can you help me set up these systems?
Mhm.
And then it became a pretty big role. Do you think now, if because the SDR is obviously the one talking, do you think SDRs now have to become more producty people because this can become such a big expectation of the role overall?
Potentially, I
Mhm.
think. Hmm. I don't like. I'm not sure if like what the remnants of
Mm,
SDR will be. Like, I don't know if the old SDR will remain. I believe that there are going to be levels to the GTME
mhm,
where it's like starting out with just like maybe minor automations or
mhm.
minor orchestrations, and then the higher you go, it's the orchestrations across the company.
Interesting. Mhm,
Going controlling the entire like top of funnel to the close, and then
mhm,
expansion outwards. And so understanding that entire thing of even incorporating customer success and churn and
mhm,
retention and increased wallet share, I think could be under the domain of a GTME.
mhm,
But I do think that the core seed
mhm,
like nugget that you need to be a GTME is communicating with customers. And I don't think the developers have it. I don't think
mhm,
anyone from the tech side, like IT,
mhm,
has it, and I don't think like RevOps, Sales Ops has it. I think the only people that actually could take that GTME role are people with direct human to human contact with somebody. And I think the account managers aren't necessarily going to do that because they have their own worries of
mhm,
closing and contracts and
mhm,
RFPs and all of that stuff. And I don't think necessarily the CSMs are going to do
mhm,
it because again, they have their own stuff with contract renewals and onboarding and things like that. So I think the SDR is really the prime one that actually has a lot more breadth of knowledge,
mhm.
because they understand what they're getting from marketing because they're the ones that get dumped all of the MQLs.
Yeah.
They're the ones that understand who the target ICP is because they're the ones that have to do all of the cold calls.
Mhm,
And they're the ones who understand what kind of is closing deals because they're the ones who get screamed at by the AEs that these leads are shit.
Yeah.
And so they're learning through sort of trial and error, through getting screamed at by customers, I never want to talk to you again. Like, okay, I guess I'm not talking to those type of people.
Mhm,
And they have all of these like harsh requirements to call like 20 people a day or send
mhm,
100 emails a day and get the responses. And so they're learning in real time what customers respond to, what markets to be going into, who, like how to get at people, what they
mhm,
might needing or wanting. And then on the same side, they're also understanding the company better because the AEs are yelling at them all the time that that deal isn't big enough, that doesn't fit our ICP.
mhm.
What the hell have you been talking to our customers about promising these things? Get your head in the game.
Yeah.
And so they're getting attacked by both the potential customers and
Mhm,
prospects and the AEs. And by getting in that sort of hot zone, they're
mhm,
really understanding the market and they're really understanding the product. And so rather than treating the SDR as this junior role that's an idiot, treating that central access point as the fulcrum lever of your entire organization and elevating them to a GTME, because that's the role, really, that's the hinge point of your entire customer journey.
It's really interesting because I think one of the things with the GTME role I've been hearing more and more is it's almost replacing the SDR, because
Mm,
a lot of the SDR work is that. GTME is good because it takes a lot of the grunt work out, the sending the emails, replying to emails, booking the demos, data flow. But I think it's the same thing, is you still need that human connection, or you know, extremely complex model. But if you have an extremely complex AI model, then it's not cheaper than humans. You're
yeah,
spending a lot of money building this.
yeah.
And I think the one problem is, I forgot the saying is like people are really bad at explaining what they do. So
Mm,
it's really hard to build a model because you can't explain like what you're doing. And I think this is like the and never ending balance between the role. But that's interesting because people always ask me, how do you get into GTME? Like, what's the best? I always said since day one, if you don't want to do with your life, get into sales, because at least it's a useful skill set for every role, as we were kind of argued before. Everything is sales. I think even for GTME is, if you understand the customer, you understand the messaging, you just know those points you want to automate, and also you know what is the probably most time consuming things.
yeah.
And I think again, it's the balance in life, with how it all works. One question we kind of were debating before is, so now with sales and marketing, this is more of just a hot button topic, is where, and this is always a question I always used to get asked in interviews, and it's always common within teams, is where does marketing's responsibility end and sales responsibility begin when it comes to balancing? Like, obviously you want to close the deal, but where do you think, and this is always an interesting debate, is where do you think marketing is responsible up until, typically, at least in your experience, in your mind? And because that's always, I feel like you said, the battle. SDRs or reps are complaining that the MQLs are bad, but marketing is complaining that sales reps are crappy at their job because they can't close the deals. How have you seen that, like, success of that handoff, where it is, there's always gonna be complaints, but at least there is some respect around where that, where successful as you run? I feel like marketing a lot of times because it's short end of the stick, because they're not the bringing the gong or ringing the bell or doing the post, because they're not closing the deals.
So, I just wanted to touch back on an earlier point. I don't think that GTMEs are replacing SDRs. I think that GTME is the evolution of the SDR. So, like, I don't think that the old SDR, like, I don't think, like sales development rep exist. It'll just be GTME, but it'll be the same kind of position in the company. And I feel like that's where GTME needs to be, and it shouldn't be from RevOps. It should be from that sort of that point of where the SDR would have been. It's now the GTME as like a Pokemon evolution role. Like the Pikachu is just an evolved one. And so back to where the handoff is, and I like to think of the racy matrix as opposed to a binary like handoff. And it's like, okay, I might be responsible for this over here, but I'm still going to be contributing or maybe informed, you know and um what's the A, like a approving or something, like that might be the VP of revenue for all of us, like in terms of like the handoff from sales to marketing, like that person, like the CRO or something might be the one who's ultimately like accountable for the whole thing. And so the thing is, though, is that even though I'm responsible for marketing, I don't stop contributing or being informed the entire way. Likewise, I don't think that sales should just wake up and look at their leads and just be like, oh, okay, I guess that's what I'm doing today. Like they should be working with marketing on the outreach campaigns to begin with, and they should know what's coming down the pipeline. Another thing to think about it is this ABM, and I feel like ABM got bastardized a while back, and it turned into this nothingness. But at the purest, at the beginning of account-based marketing, was sales and marketing working together, choosing their target market together, having marketing create outreach campaigns that sales knew was going out, that sales would follow up with that outreach right away, and that would then go into a sales process, which was then enabled by marketing through all of these other standardized content all the way to close. And somewhere along the line, actual ABM, where sales and marketing were working together at, you know, an actual target campaign group, like a target account group, it got bastardized into like, well, you do a bunch of Google ads and I'll do a bunch of phone calls and let's never talk and call it account based marketing. I have no idea where that happened. But yeah, I've been like some companies, it's like, well, we're running an ABM campaign. It's like, well, what is it? Well, we're spending $8,000 in Google ads and we have a bunch of landing pages. Okay, well, how is that account based? Well, it's for the industry. And it's like, okay, well, how did you prep with sales? Well, they're doing their phone calls with something. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like ABM at all. It sounds like nothingness. And so I think that that's sort of like back to where it's like the handoff. I believe that the handoff should never be a handoff. I believe that account based marketing, as it should be, where you're both working on it, is the only way that wins. I feel like it got bastardized somewhere. And I feel like, in terms of what marketing's contribution is just everything where you don't talk to someone. As soon as it switches over into a one-to-one conversation, that's sales. One to many is marketing, one to one is sales. That's in my mind, but the person who's knowing the one to one should understand what the one to many is doing, and the one to many should understand ultimately what the one to one is going to need to do. So either way, you're working on it at the same time, and there's never any explicit handoff. It's always just working together to get revenue. And I think the siloing of jobs is the worst thing to happen to corporations, and I think it's the worst thing to happen to revenue generation. And I think the more that companies continue to silo, where they have people not talking to each other, um, they're the worst that they're going to get, and they're not going to make any money. And the more that they can put people in teams, and the more that they can bring departments together and cohesion and let people work in unison towards a common shared goal, the better that they're going to be and the more revenue that they're going to produce.
I think that's the balance. No, but I think that's the key to that. I think that one of the issues is, as stress increases, you need to start blaming people. So then you start having these stronger divides, because it's a class thing. When thing like it's what you can't tell if a founder is good until the business starts going to shit a bit. Because when things are good, everything's good. And then when
Right?
things are going bad, it's okay. Where's this process? And I think it's the same with these processes. Like when deals are closing easily, it's like, well, we're all involved, or like, hey, we all take response. And then when things start going bad, you start playing a little bit of the blame game. And I think, as you touched, marketing the one to many once goes to one to one. And I think the racing model works well. And I think, but there is still the importance of where in the pipeline or where in the funnel, and this is why metrics are so important, where in the funnel is there issues? Is this more of a inbound challenge where we're not getting the right leads, or is, hey, we're doing really good marketing, we're getting all of these leads, but our sales process isn't effective? So I think it's also trying to find the symptoms, and oftentimes it's much a blame game rather than, are we actually doing the same thing? So
Mm-hmm.
many times marketing has one persona and sales has the other one, and no one ever talked to say, are we going after the same people? It's just an
Yeah.
assumption.
Yeah.
um Also,
Been there,
I always
done
find it. I always find it funny that, like, this is everything in life, is that humans are really bad with money. So a dollar is not a dollar. And so many times I've had founders say, "I don't want to spend money on marketing. We have to hire more sales reps." But if I'm like, we're paying, let's say, $70,000 for a junior sales rep, well, if we put $70,000 in marketing, would we get more results? And even though mathematically that makes a lot of sense and probably is more effective, you're like, well, I'm wasting money on marketing. You forget human capital is also a money driver there. And I think that's one of the things where,
it. Hmm.
as you take a step back, and same with this, all this go to market automation, this is how it all ties together, is you're spending all this money on this automation, these
Yeah.
agents, voice to text to voice, video generation. But could that money be more effectively deployed in other things that aren't as sexy, like a human to do content, a human to do sales? And I think that's something where we'll probably see over these next few years of, like, the accountant becomes more important in businesses because it's like, hey, where is this money actually being deployed and attributed effectively? Um, and can I, as we wrap up here, I think always a good final question is to say, I mean, no one can predict the future, but where do you think we're going to see the biggest shift over the next year in regards to this AI craze and AI automation? Whether the biggest shift in like people having more effective jobs or more effective go to market, where do you think AI has the biggest impact, or at least biggest impact and effective impact? And where do you think it's being overinvested in when it's either not there already, or we're trying to automate things that don't really need, are not as pressing as they should be?
Ultimately, I think it comes down to compute power
Mm-hmm.
and bottleneck at NVIDIA,
Mm-hmm.
the the processing power of all of this. And as models get smarter, hardware remains dumb. And I believe what that is the LLMs. There's going to be a plateau for learning. There's going to be a plateau for what GTMEs can actually automate. There's going to be a lot of stagnation um, with that. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's going to be a split between people who use AI and teach AI and prompt AI versus people who don't,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in trades and service jobs. So I think people who work in the AI field or who touch AI probably have some sort of advantage. I think with that, with
Mm-hmm.
all of that knowledge of like the scarcity is
Mm-hmm.
in compute power, and the kind of association to AI is kind of where the money is, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
say that. I think that that comes down again to one, big picture thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so where I'm saying like, okay, there's a bottleneck in
Mm-hmm.
compute power, and that's going to have a trickle down effect in all of society. Where big picture thinking comes from is you can't fuck around with your tokens anymore, with your
Mm-hmm.
compute power. You can't spiral down a rabbit hole and have sales chasing one thing and marketing chasing another, or blasting out 7,000 emails for
Mm-hmm.
no reason. It's like, if you don't have any gas in your car, you can't be just driving all over
Mm-hmm.
town. You have to conserve that and know that the gas in your car, you got to go to work and back home.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. No more weird crazy trips. And so it's like the founders, the biggest message I think, when we're talking about all of this, is balance and big picture thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Zoom out and make sure that things are in balance. And founders, I think they're the only ones, or the CEOs, the only ones in the company that have that ability to have big picture thinking and like holistic balance over the entire company. And so if you are, as a CEO and a founder, are losing track of your big picture thinking and not helping your company have cohesion, you're going to be massively bottlenecked because of compute power.
Mm-hmm.
Going to be wasting all of your time on AI and on LLMs that go nowhere. Your team is going to spiral out of control. And it's like, just like, get your shit together. Like, everyone needs to be marching in lockstep. It's like, hey, we got to be ready for battle. Like, it's not an explosion. Like, there's a threshold, there's a
Mm-hmm.
plateau, and it's like, you gotta be way more cohesive. You gotta be way more together, because that is a scarce commodity now. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not using it correctly, your company is going to be like really kind of just sidelined. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all of the people who do know how to manage their resources and their intelligence, and like the community that they have, like um, uh, the talent capital in
Mm-hmm.
their organization. And it's like you have to draw people together. You can't silo people anymore. You have to make sure that they're working in lockstep. They're not doing this and doing that, that they're actually building together, because that's the only way that you can actually survive in like a scarcity economy, which is where we're heading with compute power.
Mhm. I think that makes so much sense. And I think it's like anything else. It was so cheap back in the day because everyone was trying to get the market grab. And now it's not the cheapest thing. And I think that focus is always important, but it's you have to run in the right same direction. And also, I mean, just touching on this quickly, I think the biggest issue is, especially when it comes to the GTME role and like this whole like scraping and building leads list, is there's only so much data out there with
Mhm.
people. Like I think initially there's a lot of data out there on people. People are very online, but there's only so much you can really pull from intent, unless you are next level in the future when you start getting like unless you're illegally hacking people's phones. Not
These are
everyone's posting their intent online. I mean, you're not unless you get their like there's sure it just gets so crazy where you're like, okay, first off, you don't post on LinkedIn, half these tools don't work, so like let's focus on more genuine ways of doing that. But yeah, I think that's super interesting, and it's so great having you on the podcast. Anything you want to end off with? Any If people want to learn more about your view on things, anywhere people can get a hold of you or get in touch or read your views?
Yeah, for now, I'll just say if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, Larissa W. Cox, that's the best way to connect with me. I guess just my closing thought with all of this is again, is just balance. Just keep balance. Like that, isn't that? It's just always, it always leads back to that. And it's like we can spiral out and we can do all of this, but at the end of the day, the answer is always balance.